has grappled with for years. Since TSA's establishment nearly 20 years ago, its workforce has lacked the workplace rights and protections afforded to other federal employees. Despite the diversity and the dedication of the Transportation Security Officers, or the TSOs, they remain among the lowest paid workers in the entire government. We cannot wait any longer to correct this injustice. And I am proud to be an original co-sponsor of Chairman Thompson's H.R. 903, the Rights for the TSA Workforce Act, a common sense and bipartisan solution to one of TSA's foundational flaws. In 2001, after the deadly attacks of September the 11th, Congress passed legislation to create TSA to protect the safety and security of our nation. However, by excluding the TSA workforce from Title V, that statute has failed to protect the frontline workers who uphold that mission. H.R. 903 simply applies Title V to the TSA workforce and ensures TSA employees stand on equal footing to their peers elsewhere in government. The contrast between the challenging nature of TSA's work and the unfair treatment of its frontline workforce is stark as can be. Every day, TSOs screen millions of passengers and pieces of luggage, securing the public from threats to aviation security. Behind the scenes, air marshals, TSA inspectors, and other essential workers perform equally critical national security tasks. In doing so, they must deal with unruly passengers, a rapidly evolving threat landscape, and in some cases, even gunmen who have specifically targeted TSA personnel. Instead, basic full-time TSO salaries can start as low as $29,000 per year, and even after years of dedicated service, the opportunity for advancement can be far more limited than for most federal employees. Now, over the last year, TSOs have confronted new dangers. Even when faced with the prospect of coming into contact with thousands of traveling passengers each day amid a deadly pandemic, TSO showed up day after day at great risk to themselves and their families. To date, 16 TSA employees have tragically lost their lives to COVID-19, and approximately 7,800 personnel have tested positive. Yet, unlike other federal government employees, TSA employees lack the basic civil service protections, full collective bargaining rights, not if you work at the TSA. The ability to appeal disciplinary decisions to a neutral third party, not if you work at the TSA. Title V whistleblower protections, the regularly scheduled salary increases almost all other federal workers receive, again, not at the TSA. To add insult to injury, TSOs aren't even paid under the federal government's normal wage scale, known as the GS scale. As I stated before, basic full-time TSO salaries can start as low as $29,000 a year. And even after years of dedicated services, the opportunities for advancement can be more limited than for most employees in the federal government. I think most Americans would be shocked to learn that the workers charged with protecting the traveling public are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay the rent, sometimes relying on food banks, and denied basic workplace protections. These disparities come with consequences, and these consequences impact TSA's ability to fulfill its Homeland Security mission. While their salaries are low, turnover and attrition rate among frontline TSA employees are very high. Each time a TSO quits because of inadequate pay and workplace rights, TSA then needs to spend more money recruiting and training a new officer. According to the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of the Inspector General in specific, in 2017, TSA spent $16 million on new hires who left within 6 months. Wouldn't these resources be better spent ensuring that TSOs are compensated and treated fairly in the first place so they're incentivized to stay and to grow their careers at TSA? But rectifying these wrongs isn't just about improving retention and morale at TSA. Fundamentally, it's also about equity and fairness. The diversity of its workforce is one of TSA's greatest assets. 55% of TSA employees come from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. This means that when our law singles out TSA workers for disparate treatment, denying them the compensation and the protection that other federal government employees receive, people of color bear the burden of that consequence. When the 2019 government shutdown occurred and TSOs were required to show up for work without receiving a paycheck, this extraordinary burden was disproportionately placed on members of marginalized communities. So instead of maintaining a personnel system that treats TSA workers as second class, we should be exploring ways to help those workers enter the leadership pipeline and diversify DHS as a whole. Passing HR 903 will send a powerful message to the TSA workforce that they are anything but second class. They are the front line of our nation's transportation security. They are essential workers, and their dedication will be rewarded with respect and dignity. Simply put, HR 903 is about workers' rights, civil rights, and enhancing our nation's security. It is supported by members of both parties, and its benefits will flow to communities all across our nation. The TS workforce deserves to be treated equally. I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses. Thank you for being here, who each will bring important and distinct perspectives to this issue. Finally, before I close, I ask for unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter of support for HR 903 from Sarah Nelson, who is the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants. Without objection. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, for any opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson Coleman. I am pleased that the subcommittee is holding this hearing today on the important challenges facing the TSA workforce. Transportation security officers serve on the front line protecting the traveling public from the ever-present threats to our aviation system. Over the past few years, TSOs have dealt with a 35-day government shutdown, significant volume changes in passenger throughput at airport checkpoints, and the global COVID-19 pandemic. Over 7,000 TSOs have tested positive for COVID-19 since March of last year, and tragically, we've lost 16 officers to that virus. I thank the TSA workforce for their immense dedication to the American people and the traveling public. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today to discuss solutions to meet the challenges of low screener morale, recruitment and retention efforts, and pay and promotion opportunities. I thank Mr. Jeff Neal, for his service as Chief Human Capital Officer at DHS under the Obama-Biden administration, and in his role of Chief of the Blue Ribbon Panel that examined TSA's Human Capital Services delivery. I appreciate him joining us today to discuss the implementation of the panel's recommendations from 2019. I do have concerns with HR 903, the Rights for TSA Workforce Act of 2021. Madam Chairwoman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement of administration policy from the 116th Congress on HR 1140, the Rights for Transportation Security Officers Act of 2020. Thank you. HR 1140 is the precursor to the legislation we're discussing today. The statement of administration policy noted that TSA current personnel system authorized by the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, ATSA, just months after the September 11th attacks, provides the flexibility TSA needs so that it can quickly and efficiently adjust its workforce management to respond to emergency threats or national emergencies. I share that viewpoint of the legislation we're discussing today, HR 903. When Congress created TSA in November 2001, its goal was to bring the entrepreneurial spirit of the private sector. Placing TSA into Title V would go against Congress's intent and force employees into an antiquated 20th century system that really is not designed for the 21st century national security threats. TSA has all the flexibility it needs for the workforce from ATSA. It just needs to use that flexibility. Administrator Dave Bakoki has stated before Congress that TSA needs to employ his ATSA authority to make TSA an employer of choice. Our focus today should be to ensure that TSA harnesses the creativity and flexibility that it already has within ATSA to properly fund TSO salaries and create additional promotion and career advancement opportunities. As the 20th century of the 9/11 terrorist attacks approaches, I thank the men and women at TSA for their hard work and determination over the last 2 decades. I look forward to finding ways to continue to empower the TSA workforce and address current challenges within the ATSA framework that Congress designed for TSA. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranking Member. Members are also reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines that are laid out by the chairman and ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. The chair will now recognize our witnesses. We'd like to remind the witnesses that your full statement will become a part of the record. We'll ask you to summarize your statement for 5 minutes. Our first witness is Dr. Everett Kelly, who is the National President of the American Federation of Government Employees, the largest union representing federal and DC employees. Mr. Kelly has indeed had a very prestigious career. He's been a member of AFG since 1981, serving in various roles, including as National VP and President of Local 1845. He's a veteran of the United States Army and worked at the Anniston Army Depot, which he retired from after 30 years, and he also served as a senior pastor of St. Mary Missionary Baptist Church in Lincoln, Alabama, for 31 and a half years before retiring in February 2019 and being appointed pastor emeritus. So, Mr. Kelly, I think you have a new definition of retire. The second is Ms. Joy Olivia Cheney. She is Executive Director of the Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at the National Urban League. Ms. Cheney is a domestic legal policy expert, political strategist, and former Chief of Staff to Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. She has served as the Director of Equal Pay Today and as Senior Policy Counsel at Equal Rights Advocates. She held senior roles in the Obama administration, where she served as chair of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Mr. Tom Warwick is the director of the Future of DHS Project and a non-resident senior fellow with the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security and the Middle East Programs Group at the Atlantic Council. Prior to joining the Atlantic Council from the August 2008 to June 2019, he was a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism Policy at the Department of Homeland Security and a career member of the Senior Executive Service. He was an international lawyer in private practice for 17 years, representing companies in connection with investments in the Middle East and elsewhere. And finally, Mr. Jeffrey Neal. He is the founder and principal of Chief HRO LLC. He was previously a senior vice president for ICF. Prior to joining ICF, he worked for the Department of Homeland Security as the Chief Human Capital Officer under the Obama administration. Mr. Neal serves as a fellow director and former board chair for the National Academy of the Public Administration and serves as a strategic advisor to government executives for the Partnership for Public Service. So without objection, the witnesses' full statements will indeed be inserted in the record. I'm going to now ask each of the witnesses to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson Coleman, Ranking Member Jimenez, Chairman Thompson, and members of the committee. On behalf of the more than 41,000 transportation security officers AFG represent, I appreciate the opportunity to offer testimony today. AFG strongly support HR 903, the rights for the TSA Workforce Act that extend full Title V collective bargaining rights and fair pay for the TSO workforce. For 19 years, TSOs have been subject to a separate but unequal personnel system that sets them apart from other federal employees. They have fewer due process rights than even their fellow TSA employees, let alone their fellow DHS employees. TSOs are denied the ability to appeal rights. Their bosses at TSA, however, have the same rights as other federal employees. They can do appeal adverse actions not only to the MSPB, but also to the U.S. Court of Appeals. Thus, no one can say that TSA cannot function if its employees have full legal protection. Justice demands that TSOs have the same protection as the TSA employees who supervise them. TSA management has taken full advantage of this separate system to foster a toxic work environment. Fear and intimidation are the basis of everyday management, and there is little the workforce can do to hold them accountable. To this abuse work environment, the issue of low pay comes. Even some who have opposed providing due process rights to TSOs have acknowledged that their pay is far too low. An average screener starts at about $35,000 per year, and since most live in large metropolitan areas, it is not a living wage. HR 903 will place the TSA workforce on the GS pay scale, the pay system that virtually everyone else at DHS and throughout the federal government and workforce have. Many people try to delegitimize the GS locality system by calling it antiquated or inflexible. Some TSA managers have tried to turn TSOs against the GS system. They falsely assert pay is better under the current TSO system, and at the same time, GS pay costs too much. This is contradictory. The truth is that it takes 18 years to advance to the top step in the GS system. Meanwhile, it takes 30 years to advance through a TSA pay band. I'd hope to provide videos from TSOs sharing their stories, but the toxic work environment that they endure pose too much of a risk of retaliation, so I will do my best to share their stories. Worker M has worked as a TSO in Pennsylvania for 9 years. She and her husband both work full-time. They can barely make ends meet. She's first to volunteer for extra shifts, often working 14 hours at a time and giving her most of her days off. Fair pay would mean more time with her small children. Worker J works in the Washington area for 5 years and now fighting for back pay for reinstatement. He returned from surgery that was not related to his vision, but was told that he had to take a color vision test. His supervisor told him he failed the test, but would not provide him the results. He took a second test and was told he didn't pass and would not be fit for duty. He went on to his own private optometrist, passed the color vision test. He used these results to appeal his removal. The in-house Professional Responsibility Appeal Board recommended reinstatement and back pay. And still yet, TSA says that he's not fit for duty. If he could appeal to MSPB, this would not be allowed. Worker S works in New York for almost 2 years. She endured terrible harassment from her supervisor and her manager. The manager often made her uncomfortable, telling her to close his door behind and making reference to the size of his anatomy. His supervisor intimidated her with constant threats to write her up, even declining to inform her of a new COVID-related standard operating procedure, and instead telling others to hang back and watch her do it wrong, just to make her the butt of a joke. Now she's fighting to get her job back. These are not isolated occurrences. They happen every single day in hundreds of airports. TSA has allowed a management culture of harassment, fear, and intimidation to run rampant. There is no legal path to pursue, and reporting bad managers end in isolation and retaliation. My brothers and sisters at TSA work every day to protect the flying public. We say the aviation security provided by the screening workforce is essential to Homeland Security, but for too long, TSA has tried to do it on the cheap, if I may say. Members of this committee, this must end. I urge you to advance H.R. 903 to the full House and support Homeland Security in our skies the best way you can by voting for this legislation. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Ms. Cheney to summarize her statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson Coleman, Ranking Member Jimenez, Committee Chairman Thompson, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Joy Cheney, and I serve as Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy and Executive Director of the Washington Bureau for the National Urban League. I bring you greetings on behalf of Mark Morial, our President and CEO. Before I continue, I must correct the record that I was not chair of the EEOC. I worked for the chair of the EEOC, and I loved every minute of it, as I do my current job. The National Urban League is a historic civil rights organization dedicated to providing economic empowerment, educational opportunities, and the guarantee of civil rights for the underserved in America. Of the nation's 10 busiest airports, the Urban League has an affiliate in 9 and a presence in all 10 cities. I appreciate the opportunity to share the Urban League's perspective on the need for the rights for the Transportation Security Administration Workforce Act of 2021. If this is signed into law, TSA jobs will have the potential to offer pathways to stable employment with benefits and a pathway to the middle class in urban and rural communities across this nation. Thus, it is vital that TSA workers are protected in the workplace and compensated fairly. The TSA workforce is diverse and reflects the communities they serve. Nationwide, 55% of the 60,000 workers at the TSA are people of color. Black Americans make up about 11% of the overall population, but nearly triple that of transportation screeners. Latino and Asian Americans also make up a larger share of the transportation security workforce than their share of the U.S. population. Within the Department of Homeland Security, TSA workers of color have a higher concentration at TSA than they do at DHS overall. The TSA also employs a higher concentration of women workers than DHS broadly. To put it plainly, the TSA is driving the diversity and inclusion in our country's Homeland Security workforce. And yet, transportation security workers are not afforded the protections and the benefits of their counterparts elsewhere in the Department of Homeland Security or the federal government at large. It makes you wonder. The hardworking officers of TSA screen more than 2 million passengers each day at nearly 440 airports nationwide. Transportation security officers, or TSOs, are frontline workers who show up to keep our country safe through government shutdowns when they are not being paid and through the pandemic when their own health is at risk. Yet they lack the rights and protections afforded their peers in the federal government under Title V of the U.S. Code. TSA screeners do not have the same protections to collectively bargain. Their pay scale lags behind that of other agencies in the government, and they are missing out on Family and Medical Leave Act protections available elsewhere in the government. Potential whistleblowers in the TSA are not protected. Without access to an objective outside body like the Merit Systems Protection Board or negotiated grievance procedures, TSA officers are denied the ability to appeal adverse personnel decisions in the same way as other federal employees. And unlike the progressive disciplinary system applied across other federal agencies, including other DHS security components, TSOs are subject to a cumulative disciplinary system. In addition to these disparities in statutory protections, the TSA ranked the lowest out of all federal agencies in employee satisfaction with pay. TSA employees scored their employer poorly on the fairness of leadership, matching employee skills to the mission, performance-based rewards and advancement, and teamwork and innovation. This is no way to treat anyone, certainly not a workforce that reflects the diversity of this nation or one that places itself at risk daily on our behalf. As we know, people of color and women face unfair barriers to pay equity and workplace protections. One cause of this disparity is that people of color and women are often overrepresented in lower paying professions that yield fewer benefits and fewer protections. So, removing barriers to success and increasing protections to match those of other federal workers, including those in management at TSA, is absolutely a matter of equity that is overdue and should be addressed once and for all. TSOs should have the same fair pay, union rights, and treatment as other federal workers. The rights for the Transportation Security Administration Workforce Act of 2021 would codify these rights and give long overdue workplace protections to TSA officers. The Urban League supports this effort and thanks you for your focus on the issue as well as TSA officials and workers. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Dr. Kelly, excuse me for not giving you your due recognition as both Reverend and Dr. Kelly.
It does not matter, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll now recognize Mr. Warwick to summarize your statement, sir, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Jimenez, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of HR 903. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Future of DHS project. I served at DHS from 2007 to 2009, the last 10 3/4 years as a member of the Senior Executive Service. I've served under presidents of both parties and under 8 secretaries and acting secretaries of Homeland Security. I'm proud to have served alongside the men and women of TSA, who are some of the finest officers serving our nation. We need to honor TSA's service during the COVID-19 pandemic, when TSA officers have been on the front lines every day. They deserve our recognition and respect for what they do. Madam Chair, there is much about DHS that is good and important, but DHS has some serious challenges that need to be addressed. One of these is DHS's consistently low morale. This diminishes the effectiveness of the workforce, lowers employee retention rates, increases costs to hire and train new people. When DHS needs to replace experienced officers with new people, this risks the security of the American public. Some of us are old enough to remember that in the 1970s, the US military had morale problems. Fixing this became a national priority. Today, we need to treat morale at DHS with the same sense of urgency. If I could ask the clerk to put up on screen figure 1 for my testimony, let me talk about that briefly. This data comes from the Office of Personnel Management's Federal Employee Viewpoint survey. Figure 1 shows overall morale in each cabinet department. Other surveys show that DHS employees are strongly dedicated to the mission, but since 2010, DHS morale has been consistently lower than any other large cabinet department. Success in turning DHS's morale around is not only possible, it's happened many times at the component level. If I could ask the clerk to show figure 5. My testimony gives 3 success stories: the Office of Intelligence and Analysis under Frank Taylor, the Secret Service under Director Tex Ailes, and what you see here, Immigration and Customs Enforcement between 2015 and 2017 under Sarah Saldana, when morale went up by 20 points. So let me now turn to TSA. TSA's morale overall is the lowest of the large components of DHS. In 2019, out of 420 sub-agencies in the federal government, TSA ranked 398 out of 420. If I could ask the clerk to show figure 6. As this table shows, 30% of all DHS employees work at TSA, more than any other part of DHS. Madam Chair, we've done the math. If TSA's morale scores increased by 20 points, as they did at ICE under Sarah Saldana, that alone would mathematically lift DHS out of last place. That's how important morale is at TSA to improving morale at DHS as a whole. There are 3 categories where TSA stands out, and in a negative way: pay, promotions and career advancement, and employee empowerment. HR 903 will help address all 3. If I could ask the clerk to show figure 7. The most striking problem at TSA is low pay. TSA is shown in the red line. As someone once said, TSA right now is competing for talent against Amazon fulfillment centers and losing. Let me ask the clerk to show figure 8. TSA also has problems in how employee performance is evaluated and how its officers are promoted. HR 903 would force TSA to address both. Let me ask the clerk to show figure 9. There are three important questions TSA employees were asked. If we could look at figure 9, please. Thank you. Our DHS employees were asked, are promotions based on merit? Are steps taken to deal with poor performers? And can you get a better job in your organization? TSA, in each case, shown in red, is the lowest or among the lowest of all large DHS components. We have to conclude from this, Madam Chair, TSA's current pay and promotion system simply is not working. And HR 903 will be a forcing function to enable DHS and TSA to address these problems. There is only one improvement I can think of to mention here. TSA does need to retain the ability to issue security directives and emergency amendments without being subject to delays. So I would recommend a short, tightly focused additional provision so that nothing in the bill would delay TSA from taking necessary or urgent actions for a short time to protect the traveling public. This should not be open-ended or indefinite. Eventually, all things should be subject to negotiation under the collective bargaining laws governing civil service. I'd refer you to my written testimony for some other comments, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Warwick. And finally, Mr. Jeffrey Neal.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member Jimenez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Jeffrey Neal, and I'm honored to appear before this subcommittee to discuss the vital issues regarding the workforce of TSA. I was appointed as Chief Human Capital Officer for DHS in the early days of the Obama-Biden administration. And in 2019, I chaired a blue ribbon panel chartered by Administrator Pekoski to provide a neutral third-party review of TSA's human capital operations, examine how policy decisions have affected the TSA workforce, and make recommendations for improvement. Thus far, TSA has taken action on implementation of 43 of the 46 recommendations that we made and completed action on 21 of those recommendations. I share your respect for the TSA workforce, particularly the officers who protect the flying public. The Blue Ribbon Panel's recommendations recognize the need to ensure that they have competitive pay and benefits, an effective means of moving up in the organization, and recognition for performance that exceeds expectations. We recommended that TSA provide officers with longevity pay, improve use of locality pay, and that they hire an experienced HR professional to lead the human capital operation. They did those things, and Ms. Bradshaw has made significant improvements in her role as head of HR. I understand the interest in reducing the sweeping authority authorized by ATSA. However, repeal of the personnel flexibilities provided by ATSA is a double-edged sword. The panel actually considered that option, but we saw no evidence that moving to the general schedule would have the intended results. The general schedule, regardless of what anyone might say about it, was designed in 1949 for a workforce of 1 million clerks. Virtually every good government organization, including the National Academy of Public Administration and the Partnership for Public Service, has recommended replacing it with a modern pay system. While the bill rightly provides that no employee shall suffer a loss in pay, there's no guarantee that employees will continue to receive pay increases and benefits that they might otherwise have received, such as split shift pay differentials and expanded leave transfer options that aren't available under Title V. There's also no guarantee that TSOs are going to be classified at any particular grade level, nor is there any guarantee of funding if the jobs happen to be upgraded. Moving 50,000 employees to a different personnel system, even one that exists in other agencies, is a highly complex process that requires extensive planning. Most TSA employees, TSA managers, and HR specialists are not experienced in the general schedule and most other aspects of Title V, nor are the contractors who actually do most of TSA's operational HR work. Likewise, not all TSA IT systems are designed to accommodate the general schedule. The 6-month transition period in the bill does not provide adequate time to conduct necessary planning, system changes, and training. My 33 years of federal HR experience tell me that rushing implementation of something so far-reaching almost certainly ensures it will be done badly, putting TSA employees and the TSA mission at risk. I urge the subcommittee to actually take this opportunity to consider moving beyond the general schedule. Set minimum pay standards for TSOs that still provide flexibility to raise pay when it's needed. Codify a process that provides longevity pay increases, but allows high-performing employees to move up the pay scale quickly. Allow TSA within prescribed guidelines to develop a pay system that fits the TSA workforce, provides job security, ensures employee appeal rights, pay stability, and upward mobility, and allows TSA to compete for the talent it needs. And make all of those changes within a disciplined program management approach that provides a clear understanding of the necessary steps, costs, and risks, and the time it will take to do it right. Madam Chair, Ranking Member Jimenez, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and thank you to each of the witnesses for their testimony. And Mr. Work, I just wanted to piggyback on something that you mentioned. I think it was you, with regard to being able to make security decisions in a quick and efficient manner. That discussion is taking place in terms of language that may need to be updated in 903 that will not interfere with the ability to make those decisions. So thank you for raising it. And I knew that I had seen something to that effect. And so I'm glad to report that we actually do listen. So I'd like to remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel. And I will now recognize myself for questioning. One of this committee's priorities is to obviously improve morale at DHS. And as we know, DHS employees do consistently rank themselves among the least satisfied federal workers, as Mr. Warwick has pointed out. But as Mr. Warwick's testimony laid out, the department is not a monolith, and morale varies widely among different components. Mr. Warwick, this is for you. Last year, you authored a report on the future of DHS that said, and I quote, "Turning around DHS's morale problem starts with the two components that drive the department's lowest scores, TSA and CBP." You also wrote that by offering better pay, by giving TSA employees the prospect for a meaningful career, and by empowering TSA's employees, TSA can help lead and turn around DHS's morale. Would you please expand on how TSA serves as the tip of that spear for a turnaround for the whole department?
I'd be happy to do that, Chairwoman. TSA is the largest component of DHS, and its problems are, for all of the difficulty that HR 903 might give, TSA's problems are almost the easiest to solve. HR 903 is one of the most constructive forcing functions to come out of the Congress in years in this area. I'm fully aware of the fact that you could simply raise TSA salaries by $400 million through the appropriations process. But let's be realistic. These problems, as your witnesses have told you, have been known for some time, and yet this problem has not been fixed. One of the reasons that I welcome HR 903 is that it is a forcing function. It will compel changes that will address these problems. And so that's one reason I hope that it moves forward very speedily and in a bipartisan way through the Congress, because this really would show the employees of TSA and all of DHS the commitment of both the legislative and the executive branch to addressing DHS's morale problems. These really do translate into security.
Thank you, Mr. Warwick. Dr. Kelly, from the perspective of AFG's membership, would you please describe sort of quickly how the passage of the Rights for the TSA Workforce Act would improve morale? Did I lose that?
Oh, yeah. I have to think about unmute myself, right? But we truly believe that it would improve morale because it enhances the ability to do away with discriminatory practices, especially when it comes to women and people of color. Okay, it automatically improves morale. And unlike Brother Neal's testimony, we believe that the system has been tried and proven. It's been substantially modified over the years to make it better. So we just think that it would improve morale all around, from FG's perspective.
Thank you very much. With a little bit more than a minute, I'd like to direct a question to you, Ms. Cheney. During the hearing, you mentioned the 55% of the TSA personnel are people of color, making it one of the most diverse components in DHS, probably the most diverse component. In your testimony, you explained how passing the rights for the TSA Workforce Act is absolutely a matter of equity, and I couldn't agree more. What message does it send that one of the government's most diverse workplaces also happens to be among its lowest paid?
Well, I think it sends a message that we don't care about this workforce, that they are not respected, that they are not valued, that their sacrifices are not valued. And I know that's not what we mean, because when we go through the airport, I've seen members of Congress do it. We say, thank you for your service. But the way that we thank people here and in particular in America is that we pay them properly. We give them fair benefits. The federal government is a great place to work, but if you don't have the benefits of the federal government, it's not a great place to work. It's a cruel joke. So we want to restore their rights.
Tagging onto that for just 30 seconds, what does that say about the issues of equal protection? Does it not point to unequal protection?
I think that, that's a legal question. I think there's some arguments there. I'm sure the union is making that point. What I think it says is that we have to make the workers at TSA whole. We have to make sure that they're treated the same as we expect all other federal employees, as we expect all of us to be treated. That's what it says to me, and that is about the spirit of equal protection under the law.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I am going to recognize the other members who have questions that they may wish to ask. And in accordance with the guidelines laid out by the chairman and ranking member in the February 3rd colloquy, I'm going to recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. But I am first going to recognize my esteemed ranking member, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I really appreciate that. And Mr. Neal, do you think that the number one issue concerning the morale for TSO workers is actually pay, that they feel that they're underpaid?
I don't. I think actually probably the number one issue is quality of leadership in the airports.
The quality of leadership in the airports, what do you mean by that?
Quality of supervisors. When we looked at employee survey data at TSA, what we found is there were some airports where the workforce had good things to say about TSA and about the work. And there were airports where people are doing the same work and incredibly unhappy. And obviously, pay is a factor in that, but the quality of the supervisors is a bigger factor. And the fact that you have some airports where the employees actually say good things about the agency says that a big chunk of it is the quality of those leaders. And that was one of the recommendations we made, was to improve the quality of supervisors in the airports.
Well, I guess that complies with my theory about that 95% of the problems are management in nature. Is that correct?
I would say that's true. Usually when you find problems in a workplace, look to management first.
Would moving the TSOs into Title V, would that solve the issue of management?
No, sir, it wouldn't.
All right, so management is actually something that the administration can deal with by choosing the right managers, by having the right policies in place. And does ATSA give the administration the flexibility to put those procedures in place?
It actually gives them more flexibility than Title V would give them to deal with that kind of issue.
So if we wanted to really take care of the issue at TSA and other agencies, is we would direct the administration to put the proper procedures in place, the flexibility that they have under ATSA. And I also believe wholeheartedly, I think they are underpaid. And we as Congress should be appropriating more money for TSO workers so that we can bump them up in pay and bring them up to the level that most federal employees are getting, because I do think that that's part of the problem, but I also think that 95% of the problem is management.
I would agree with that, and I do think that the pay issues are very significant issues, and those need to be dealt with. Part of the problem about putting them under the general schedule, though, is there's no agreement on what grade level they would be. Some of TSA's classifiers said they would be GS5s. Some of us told us they would be GS7s or maybe GS8s. So nobody knows right now exactly what grade level these folks would be, and this bill could result in them getting large bumps in pay, or it could result in them being put in dead-end jobs where there's not more than a GS5 or a GS6 or 7.
Right. Mr. Warwick, to you, do you think that just simply by putting him in, moving the entire workforce to Title V is going to solve the problem of morale at TSA?
If the clerk is able to put up figure 11 from my slide set, I'd like to show you something. Basically, it's certainly true that the Title V approach has its flaws, but the solution is to fix the flaws in Title V, not to say that TSA employees should somehow be denied the benefits of Title V simply because it has flaws. So,
But sir, I don't have that much time, so I really can't, look at your slides. So I have some other questions that I have. Isn't it true though that say in TSA right now, if you're a part-time employee, you can actually get full-time health benefits, but if you slide over to Title V, the Title V schedule, that if that happened, that part-time employees of TSA would not be able to get full-time health benefits?
Dr. Kelly can describe in detail that depends on the number of hours somebody works, and that a supervisor, by playing games with the hours, can deny people benefits. That doesn't strike me as a fair policy.
No, but I'm saying under Title V, that would be true. But right now, under TSA, part-time workers can get full-time benefits, right?
It depends on how many hours they work and other factors.
Okay, well, thank you. Looks like my time is about to expire, so I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize Representative Payne for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I apologize. I'm in transit, so please bear with me. And let me just say to you, Madam Chair, thank you for this timely hearing. Since your arrival in Congress, you've been consistent on this issue around justification and a good working environment for these great public employees and servants. So I just want to commend you for that.
Thank you, kind sir.
Ms. Cheney, I greatly appreciate the perspective that you provided here today. Clearly, TSA is a very diverse agency. And I'm sorry, when things go wrong, they all go wrong. But, however, diversity doesn't always correlate with equity. Would you please explain the difference between diversity and equity, and how providing TSA workforce full collective bargaining rights would create a more equitable agency?
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman, for the question. I mean, just look at the agency as it currently is. It's diverse, and yet it's not equitable. Whenever you find a situation where, if things look diverse on their face, and yet it looks like people are getting equal treatment, and yet in reality, if all of the people working at TSA, if they're predominantly people of color, yet they're not being treated the same as other people in the federal workforce, including other people at DHS, that's not equitable. And so we have to go and fix that in order to have equity at TSA, and equity for, really, as I said in my testimony, the workforce that is driving diversity and inclusion at the Department of Homeland Security. So it's absolutely important that we address this.
Thank you. And with respect to, we've seen how the pandemic has disproportionately impacted marginalized groups around the country in a tragic way. Considering these impacts and that the majority of TSA's workforce is made up of racial and ethnic minorities, would you conclude that they are also experiencing many of the same challenges?
Absolutely. What we know is that they are more than likely experiencing a greater number of COVID related deaths and illness in their families, greater number of economic trouble. We already know from some of the testimony before that during the pandemic, many of them were living paycheck to paycheck, were struggling. We know that this same thing that's happening to them has happening to people of color elsewhere. But the difference is they work for the federal government. And so we expect that they would have greater benefits. And I'm sure when they came to work there, they expected to have greater benefits. So it must be a cruel joke to be representing the United States of America and on being on the front lines and not being paid like it. We've got to fix it.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I've introduced legislation, the hazardous duty pay for frontline federal workers that would ensure that TSA workers and other servants who have continued to put their lives at risk during this pandemic are properly recognized for the danger that they have put themselves in as they continue to keep the traveling public safe. And I invite all my colleagues to join me as a co-sponsor of this bill. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. The chairman now recognizes Representative Ralph Norman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank each one of the participants today. Mr. Neal, on your testimony, what was the Congress's intent when it established the TSA after 9/11 in terms of its personnel system?
It was intended to be a very flexible system that could be adapted as the situation changed within the TSA mission.
So what is it so important for TSA to have a personnel system that is not like the antiquated Title V systems?
The problem with Title V isn't the bulk of Title V, it's the general schedule pay system part of it. And that system is inflexible. It doesn't provide the ability for people to move up quickly. It doesn't provide the ability to adapt the pay to the labor market. So it was designed when literally more than half of the federal employees were GS5 and below clerks. So it was a system designed for a workforce full of clerks, which we don't have now. And it's very inflexible when it comes to assigning grade levels to jobs. Right now, it's possible that if TSOs were put under Title V, that these officers could come out as GS5s or 6s, which is the equivalent of a clerk or a secretary. So there's nothing in the bill that would guarantee a reasonable grade level for the employees. And right now, the classification would be akin to something like a security guard classification standard that OPM's written. And those jobs tend to be GS5s and 6s. So there's no guarantee this will actually help pay for TSOs.
Okay. And, we've heard about low morale. What test was used to gauge the morale? Was it an internal questionnaire that went to an outside source, or what was used?
They generally are using the government-wide federal employee viewpoint survey that goes out to every federal employee every year. And it is accurate that TSA's morale numbers based on federal employee viewpoint survey are quite low. It's also accurate that CBP, Customs and Border Protection's morale figures are quite low, and they pay their employees GS12 pay. So they're much higher graded, much higher paid than the TSOs are likely to be, and yet they still have significant morale issues that haven't been dealt with by the pay that they've gotten.
does the test results point to management, individual management at each of the airports that you mentioned?
It does tend to show that there are problems with quality of leadership. A significant number of the questions relate to issues that are entirely under the control of managers, and in those, they don't score well at all.
So that's really the administration's, if it really wants to get to the root of the problem and correct it, it's up to the administration to issue guidelines addressing the problems that the morale report shows. Would that make sense?
I would say that the current and the previous 3 administrations should have been doing more to deal with supervisory issues.
And put guidelines in place.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Warwick, you state that HR 903 can solve the issues of the low morale with the TSA, but TSA can it not fix its own hiring, retention, and pay issues under the ATSA?
It certainly would be possible to be able to do that. However, the fact that it hasn't been done for so many years would lead you to believe that that's just not a workable solution. I think if you appropriated a lot more money, or if you graded the work done at a level to generate enough retention in the TSA workforce, you could solve this problem through several ways. But of all the methods available, HR 903 is the best one on the horizon right now.
And would you agree that if the morale studies show that the managers bear a lot of the responsibility, should not be top priority?
Actually, if you look at Figure 11 in my written testimony, TSA ranks its supervisors. The employees rank their supervisors about on a par with other DHS supervisors. And so I don't think the supervisors are the same level of problem that pay, promotions, and empowerment are. I certainly would hold supervisors to a high standard, and there are improvements that definitely should be made in that area. That's absolutely true.
Okay. And back to you, Mr. Deal. The Blue Panel report shows that approximately it took 270 days to hire a TSA screener. Why so long?
The gentleman's time is up, but you can answer the question quickly.
It's primarily the security clearance process. It's a complicated and lengthy process, and that causes it to be drug out for a long time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Representative Dina Titus.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and thank you for your indulgence of letting me come back on. I was right in the middle of another question. I'd like to ask Dr. Kelly if he would talk some more about the impact of unions. I mean, Las Vegas is a strong union town, and we know when unions can negotiate for their workers, they're able to come to a more equitable situation. Unions help get people get in the middle class and stay in the middle class. And here's TSA with the inability to unionize like other government agencies are able to do. And would you just address some of the problems that you see that have occurred because of that lack of a presence at the table, to talk about working conditions, talk about COVID, talk about equitable salary, being safe, being fair? Dr. Kelly?
There are great advantages in being a part of the union. Now, I have to say that, all of TSA is not absent a union, because the very supervisors that rate and rank these employees, the TSOs, are already unionized. Okay, they understand the urgency, they understand the importance. At the same time, these employees that TSOs don't have that same flexibility. Now, when it comes to unions' ability to negotiate, right? I think it makes for a good playing field to have those kind of collaborations between the management team and the workforce, right? It gives the manager an opportunity to hear from the workforce to make the determination as to, at least give management an opportunity to hear the workforce, and what they value more than anything. When it came to the COVID, we all know that we had over, as of yesterday, 7,800 TSOs that was affected by the COVID. We had about 16 that died from COVID. Can we replace that? No. Had we had a union presence that was really talking about, you know, how we can make a safer workplace, how we can prevent deaths and illnesses, you know, prevalent right there, and it was open, clear and honest debate, I don't think we would have seen that many deaths. I don't think we would have seen that many being contracted with the virus. So it has such benefit. You're talking about morale, right? We can't say that the GS system is a perfect system. I don't think anyone that have offered testimony today would say that. But the people do trust it, okay? TSOs trust the system. They want the system. They ask for the system. And pay is their number one issue. I'm listening to them every single day. And they can, so many of them can barely make ends meet because of that. Now, again, the GS system is not perfect, but it is certainly better than these inflexible opportunities that's being presented, you know, and the employees are asking for the GS system. If you want morale, you know, to be beefed up, you know, they're saying, give us better pay so that we can provide, you know, stability in our homes and in our communities and those types of things. So I hope I answered your question.
You did. You absolutely did, Dr. Kelly. And that also leads to my next question to Mr. Neal and his blue ribbon panel. I'm just curious why there was no labor representative from TSA sitting on that panel to help come up with the recommendations for redoing the personnel system.
You're muted, Mr. Neal. You have to unmute.
Sorry, sorry about that. We were asked to put together a list of people from outside the government who were senior people who would understand the issues at TSA, and there was no request to include a union member in the panel, so we did not.
You say you were asked and there was no request. Who asked you to do that and suggested
Well, it was
include labor?
It was a contract, and so there was a solicitation that said, here's what we want to have in a panel, the type of people. They didn't exclude folks who were union officials. They didn't include them. And we had a small panel, so.
Or overall better assessment if you'd have had some union people at the table, since this is a personnel system that's going to be affecting their daily lives, and they could have had very valuable input to the panel.
I think they would have told us a lot of what we heard from the employees, which was they didn't like their pay system. They didn't like how they were treated by supervisors. The employees were, one of the great things about TSA's workforce is they're vocal, and they're not the least bit bashful about telling you about what they think and what they don't like. And they were very clear about what they didn't like, and our report highlighted that and highlighted some of the things the agency needed to do to address those issues.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I'll yield back, but I just think it's almost ridiculous to have a blue ribbon panel to look at the personnel system when you don't have any representation from labor, when the lack of a labor union to represent your interests is one of the biggest problems. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Titus. A couple of things I heard I'd just like to speak to very, very quickly. Number one is that conceptually, it might have been a great idea for TSA to have the kind of flexibility that we thought we needed at that time, a very heightened time of concern, unprecedented assault upon us, etc. So the flexibility has existed to make life better and fairer and more predictable, but it hasn't happened. And every administration that came about since that legislation was enacted, there's responsibility for that. The one thing Title V does is ensures predictability and treatment equal to what other federal employees get. And there's a provision, because I know the ranking member was very concerned about pay grade and pay level. But I want you to know that there is a a protection in the bill that ensures that no employee would be paid less under Title V. And so this may not be perfect, but I think that these employees are crying and screaming and yelling and hollering and stomping for equality and predictability and the opportunity to see where their careers could possibly lead them. I now would like to recognize, thank you, Congresswoman, for your patience here, Congresswoman Elaine Laurie.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing today to talk about TSA as they're passing the 20-year milestone. And I've visited with TSA representatives here at our local airport at Norfolk International Airport as they work through the government shutdown when I first came into office, and as they've endured a year of difficult working conditions through the pandemic. And one thing I've heard every time that I've visited with them is that they are very interested in transitioning to be under Title V. I'll note that our TSA workforce here at the Norfolk International Airport is, really maintain safety of passengers. They have apprehended 6 firearms this year alone in carry-on luggage through our airport, even with the reduced passenger volume. So they really are removing something that is potentially a threat to passengers in the air. And one of the things that's been argued by people who are detractors from switching to being under Title V say that TSA was provided unique authorities to give it the ability to issue security directives and emergency amendments to protect the traveling public without being subjected to delays or negotiations, even with its own employees. And Dr. Kelly, could you speak to that? Are those valid concerns? How could they be mitigated if employees were placed under Title V?
As far as TSA being able to take an action in a timely manner?
Yes.
Okay.
We didn't change anything about how they could react in a timely manner. Like our chairwoman said, some of things were put in place in the very early days of the Department of Homeland Security post 9/11 establishing TSA because it was thought there needed to be, some rapid flexibility. But would any of that go away under Title V, or would they still be able to serve in the same way?
Okay. And thank you, Congressman Lowry, for that question, because there is a misrepresentation of that. It does not go away. TSA still have the flexibility to act in a timely manner to address any issue that it needs to address. And while I have just a moment, can I just say this, that, the bill as it relates to pay, can specify, right, the classification of the job. And that's the thing that we also need to understand, so I just wanted to add that while I had the opportunity, if that's okay.
Well, no, thank you, Dr. Kelly. And, thinking about this, there's other entities within DHS, CBP, for example, that has a security mission that operates under Title V. Would you agree that similarly, if CBP can operate under that it would show that there's really no reason that TSA couldn't operate as well under that system?
I totally agree with you on that. It's been tried and proven. Once again, over and over we see that TSA can operate effectively and efficiently under Title V because, so many other entities have already proven that it can occur.
Great. And Dr. Kelly, one last question, because, I'm just trying to dispel some of the things that, maybe critics of this legislation have put forward. But, some people might argue that under current law, TSA can exercise a one-step removal for serious offenses, but would switching to Title V change anything about being able to hold employees accountable, if there was some egregious or misconduct action?
Again, Title V does not eliminate TSA's ability to act in a timely manner for even up to removal on egregious actions, and Title V does not eliminate that. Matter of fact, it might enhance that in many ways.
Well, thank you. Well, I just wanted to bring up some of these points because, in talking about this, these are some of the arguments that people have made against this, and I strongly support this legislation. I co-sponsored it last Congress and look forward to having an opportunity to move it forward this Congress. And, just wanted to make sure we could dispel kind of any of those myths about what a shift to this Title V system for TSA employees would entail. So thank you again for testifying today and to all of our witnesses for being here. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And I think that we all recognize that this very important piece of legislation is still in the process. And if, as a result of our holding these various hearings, things come up that we recognize would improve, protect, or solidify, we ought to be willing to listen to those things and to incorporate those considerations as we move forward. We have no more members who have questions. And so if there's no desire to enter a second round of questioning, alrighty then. I want to thank the witnesses. You all have been very, very helpful. I appreciate your commitment to the work that you do and the perspective that you shared with us today. And the members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for you, and we would ask that you would respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. So without, excuse me, I'm having a technical. I have one more thing to say regarding 903. I think that by and large, there's bipartisan support for what we're intending to accomplish on behalf of these frontline employees who really had it on the line during the pandemic and have it on the line after January 6th and got it on the line right now. And they are confronted with all kinds of possible dangerous situations, but they show up, and their purpose is to keep us safe, and they keep us moving, and they keep us safe. And so I'm going to ask that my Republican counterparts on this subcommittee consider signing on to the legislation. If you want to help us to make it better, please offer your advice. But we agree that these employees are entitled to greater protections, greater dignity and respect for the work that they do. As I said, that some of the members of the subcommittee might have questions for the witnesses, and they'll probably send them to you. And we ask that you would respond expeditiously in writing to us. Now, without objection, the committee records will remain open for the 10 days. Hearing no more business, God bless you. Thank you for being with us today and sharing your information. The committee is adjourned.
Thank you.